Good morning. I think I might make a start so we can try and keep to time during the morning. Hope you're well rested and ready for another day. I was thinking this morning, it's a bit like being on a wave, this conference. You sort of get on the wave and travel along and hear information, see things and hear things. And yesterday was really, a lot of things to see, a lot of things to hear. And so I'm looking forward to another day as we hear further perspectives on climate change. Please do remember some of those perspectives on climate change are upstairs in the atrium, so there's artwork to look up there. There's the chance to provide feedback as well. And I think yesterday the feedback sheets were in your bags. We do have more of those feedback sheets available as well. There's been some really good feedback come in, but we would like some more. So, and if you've got any questions about how does that feedback work, then see myself or see Professor Edward Hanna just down the front there. So more feedback and tell us what you're experiencing on the wave. This morning, in terms of the two keynotes, what we are aiming to do is to have a 5-minute comfort break between the two. So I think we're scheduled for 10:15 for the change. So I think around 10 past 10, we'll aim to have a bit of a comfort break so everyone's got the chances to stand up and stretch in between the two addresses. I think that is everything that I'm aware of. Enjoy the ride, enjoy the wave. Dr. Emily Colgan is presenting the next session.
A very good morning to you all. It is my very real pleasure to introduce to you this morning the Right Reverend Marc Andrus. Bishop Marc is currently the Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of California. He holds qualifications in science, social sciences and theology. And in his role as Bishop, Bishop Marc has focused on issues relating to justice and peace, particularly climate change. Bishop Marc's advocacy work has included representing the Episcopal Church at the annual United Nations Climate Conference and leading the Episcopal Church efforts to uphold the Paris Agreement. He's also a member of the Are We Still in Leaders Circle, a group of ambassadors for American climate action. Bishop Marc, it has been such an honour meeting you and sharing conversation, over the past couple of days, and we're really looking forward to your presentation this morning, Ocean of Love, Science, Policy and Spirituality of the World Water Crisis. So please welcome Bishop Marc.
Good morning. Is this, yes, it's on, right? Raise your hand if you can hear me. We're going to begin with a little centering exercise. Some of you, who has joined us today? Welcome. We're glad you're here. And all of you who were so blessed to hear the beautiful presentations yesterday, welcome back. Good to be together. You're all seated, so if you take a moment to make yourself rooted, your feet uncrossed and flat on the ground. And your spine, as I like to put it, energetic. And you may keep your eyes, well, you can do whatever you want, but you could keep your eyes open or slightly closed, or you can close them. And I'm just going to guide us for a moment in Thich Nhat Hanh's breath of peace. So as you breathe in, if you would think of receiving the energy of peace that God the universe have to give us, love that pervades the universe. So take in peace as you breathe. And as you exhale, let go of all that concerns you, that distracts you from where you are and who you are. Breathe in peace. Breathe out stress. Breathe in peace. Breathe out stress. Gratitude is part of peace. Allow yourself to feel a moment of gratitude for something that has started this day, the family, the air, the water, the earth, the friends, and if you're feeling grief for this beautiful planet, all of its life, trust God and trust the universe enough to let it go as you breathe out. There will be time to take up your anxiety soon enough. Your commitments, your work, live in peace. Amen. That's a Hebrew word that everybody knows. It means, may it be so. So let's say that together. Amen. Hey, good morning, good morning. The central idea that I'm going to be working with you together on today is that the water crisis and the planetary crisis is a spiritual crisis. At root, it is a spiritual crisis. And we understand this in that we see that everything around us, the physical manifestations that we see around us, are in fact manifestations of that which is in us. We have desires, we have hopes, we have dreams, and we make those into the physical reality around us. Buildings reflect that, our clothes reflect that, the patterns of our relationships. All those are coming forth from the inner landscape of our own beings, not only as individuals, but of course as communities as well. Here in Lincolnshire, in Lincoln, the medieval cathedral, the 1967 Lincoln Hotel. You may like or not like 1960s architecture, but all of that were manifestations of a spirit of a time. That is a truth that we can understand. We also understand that stories shape us. We heard Archbishop Winston really refer to the primacy of stories yesterday, and there are stories that cultures hold as sacred. They are not meant to be uncriticized. They may contain things that we learn are not good for human life, and we should interact with them. But they are also, in some way, the culture that enshrines that story, holds it as sacred. And we need to honor that in some ways. So here is one. Here is one sacred story. It comes from the Hebrew Bible. And Emily is a great expert in this, and she's going to be speaking to us later. So I'm so looking forward to that. This is the story called The Flood. But I'm not going to read you the flood part. I'm going to read you the run-up to the flood. Why was there a flood? Why does this sacred story say that God flooded the world? What was that about? So hear this story from the book of Genesis. When people began to multiply on the face of the ground, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that they were fair, and they took wives for themselves of all that they chose. Then the Lord said, "My spirit shall not abide in mortals forever, for they are flesh. Their days shall be 120 years." The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humans who bore children to them. These were the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown. The Lord saw that the wickedness of humankind and its violence was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made humankind on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have created, people, together with animals and creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the sight of the Lord. Now, let me say that for me, as a Christian, as an inheritor of this story, it was not my people's story to begin with, but we have gratefully inherited it. I do not take this as a historical record. It is not meant in my understanding of it to be a factual account. If I were there with my digital camera, I might not see things the way this story narrates them. But let me underline that I take it as containing truth. So there's a difference in fact and truth, isn't there? There's a difference in fact and truth. And so I take it as holding truth. What are the truths that the storyteller in Genesis wanted me to receive? And it's two things. Humanity seeks to exalt itself and rise up beyond mortal expectations. So I've got a body, and it has limitations, and it is wearing out. I'm doing some things to try to prevent that. Más y menos. But yes, it's going to wear out, and I will die, and my limitations are more now than they were yesterday, than they were the day before that. But humanity has always sought, this story puts forward to us, to try to get beyond those. We would like to exceed our boundaries. In some ways, this is okay, right? We strive against limitations and we achieve things. Great things happen when we push ourselves against limitations. We become greater. But it's also true that the unchecked need for power is very much why we are where we are today on the earth. We start the Holocene period, and then the Anthropocene period. I'm going to be talking a lot about the Anthropocene. If it's not a familiar term to you, it will become more so. But we kind of, people, Marc said yesterday that there's argument about when to date the beginning of the Anthropocene. Very true. A fair date, in my view, is the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, a fair date. And with that comes the invention, the big thing that starts the Industrial Revolution is what? The steam engine. The steam engine. And that takes my power as a human being and horsepower, right? That's how we measured it, right? Horsepower. I have 2, I have 4. It pushes human power way beyond the limitations of this body, or the limitations of an ox, or of even a train of animals, you see. So this abets our desire for more power. The other piece of this story's truth is that humanity tends towards violence and evil. This is what God saw and was grieved about it. It hurt the heart of God to see our tendency towards violence. Until the 20th century, we could pretend, I think, and we did, that was not true. But with the events of the 20th century, and Owen Barfield, one of the Inklings, along with J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and Charles Williams, Owen Barfield said that the apogee of our move towards violence and towards exaltation of the self was the dropping of the 2 atomic bombs by the United States in Japan. I repeated this in front of a group that included American Jews who were direct descendants of Holocaust survivors. And they looked at me with horror and said, would he not have said that the genocide, the Holocaust, was equally as horrifying as the dropping of the atomic bombs? And I said, of course, of course. And we can add to this, can we not? We can add the species extinction, which is growing apace every day, and we did that. That is our action. So we became, and of course Rachel Carson lifted our eyes to see that in 1961 and 62. So we could no longer pretend, by 1945, let us say, that we were innocent in terms of having innocent hearts and hands and clean hands. So in some way I have to affirm the truths of this story in my own life. I have to say, yes, I have lived as a people, among a people, an inheritor of those who are violent, and I am part of those and own my own tendency towards the inflation of the ego and power for myself. So God takes in hand the waters of the world, a power so vast and almost limitless that humans cannot hope to control it themselves. And this is what God is doing in this story. Again, free ourselves from the idea that this is a historical record and say, this is meant to teach me something about living today. So these are not waters that are physical waters. These are the waters of your inner landscape. And the desire to contain them is, we, humanity, expends quite a lot of energy of keeping those waters sublimated, where we don't have to really look at the pressure of consciousness that is leading us to see the truth about reality. Several pieces of that story, and in the Hebrew Bible, tohu and bohu, waste and void, chaos and confusion, those are the conditions over which the Spirit of God hovered in the creation story. Tiamat, which in the Hebrew Bible is the deep or the abyss, is a primordial goddess in the Babylonian, Mesopotamian world of the salt water, and vast, and an expression of the world ocean, power. Leviathan, a primordial sea monster, so prodigious that it eats one whale a day as its meal. That's just in Jewish tradition. The Leviathan embodies the ocean, and the ocean embodies power that is God's and not mine. This is what the story is trying to say, is that it is God who is in control of the power of the universe, not me, so that I might let go of this unceasing need to express that power. There's a shift in the translation of a psalm. There go, 104, there go the ships, there go Leviathan, whom thou hast formed to sport therein. That's the King James version of that verse in Psalm 104. It has been retranslated to say, instead of sporting in the water, like playing, merry in the water, that the intent of the poem is perhaps to say that God is so powerful that God forms this great sea beast who is many, many leagues in length and eats whales for its meals, that God, for the sport of it, God's sport, creates this creature. It's in God's power. And in Job, when God is remonstrating with Job and trying to justify each other's ways to each other, God says, can you pull in Leviathan with a hook, or tie down his tongue with a rope? God then increases the world ocean by opening the floodgates of heaven, adding to the immeasurable main to the end that wicked humanity and almost all life is swept away, and a righteous remnant is left to repopulate the world. We who hear this story are meant to be those people. We're supposed to hear that we are descended from Noah, that we are given this start, that our lives are allowed to start over, momentarily, momentarily, momentarily. Not at one point, but every moment of the day we have the chance to touch the ultimate and to begin again, start again. This story is repeated, the truth of this story is repeated in the New Testament. And I'm going to read you one other story. This one, it appears in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. This is Mark's version. Well, not mine, but another Mark. Jesus stills a storm. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushions. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up, rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe, and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey?" So the question is, who are we now who have heard these stories? Is the one that strains at the sublimating gates of our consciousness? This is the question. For us to reconsider who we are at this moment. So I said this is now being called the Anthropocene. Now, who's familiar with that term? Almost everyone, but not everyone. It's a Greek term, like so many great things. It's a Greek term. Anthropos is a human being, and the Anthropocene is a period, an epoch that is being set by geologists based on what you can find in the stratigraphy of the Earth. So again, the physical evidence of who we are is what they use to name the epochs in which we live. And the Holocene means completely new. And that started about 11,000 years ago with the evidence of cities all over the Earth and human beings spreading, not just a few human beings, but many, many human beings, and they were building cities. So that was the Holocene. But what about the Anthropocene? Who knows who James Lovelock is? How many of you are English? Yeah. So James Lovelock is still alive, as far as I know. He's 100 years old. And he is the English scientist who, in 1964, had the idea of Gaia, the Gaia, what is now called the Gaia theory. He wrote a book 10 years later. He finished a book, Gaia, a new way to look at Earth. And so he's an Earth scientist. He looks at atmosphere and he looks at the Earth, but he was working with NASA in 1964, and he was looking at Mars. And he says that he started to turn his gaze, the gaze of his mind, back to the Earth. And it allowed him to see the Earth as a whole. And he said there was something really remarkable that he saw, which was that the atmosphere was balanced. The atmosphere was balancing itself, or something was balancing it. And he came to the conclusion that it was the biosphere, the living part of the Earth, that was balancing the atmosphere. He likens it to the fur of a cat, or the claws of a cat, not living in itself, but controlled by that which is living. So the atmosphere was like that. The Anthropocene period, the biosphere is no longer fully in control of the atmosphere of the Earth. It is now in the unconscious control of human beings. The unconscious control of human beings. It is not being regulated. It is not being harmonized. It is not being integrated. It is being disrupted and destroyed. Now, this is the Anthropocene. So the evidence of our inner life, the spiritual side of the water crisis, is the increasing chaos on the planet, in water, in soil, in air, and then, of course, refracted back to us in us. So the Genesis story is real in the inner landscapes of our hearts. And the story of Jesus on the Sea of Galilee, calming the storm, is real in our hearts. You know, realtors say location, location, location. And what do you suppose for God is the most precious piece of real estate in the world? Your heart. What the contents of our heart is, Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart is as well. So what is in this inner landscape, as we breathed in and breathed out at the beginning, peace or something else, violence, desire for power, this is the contested side of the climate crisis. And what is coming out of it is what we see all around us and in the water. So science, journalistic reporting, novelists and filmmakers of the post-apocalyptic future have some things to say to us about the Anthropocene outcomes. What is the outcome of this Anthropocene, which I would like to say to you is, in the spiritual realm, the Anthropocene is we making ourselves gods in place of God. This is what is going on, right? This is the contested idea between God and the people. The Nephilim were kind of, Emily, sort of angel creatures. They were somewhere in between God and humans. They apparently had vast lives that went on and on and on, you see. And so marrying the Nephilim, this is back to that original story, was going to increase our lifespan, you know? Right, you get that. So, this comes from The Day After Tomorrow, and this is from Geostorm. And these stories, the Aquaman, really bad movie, but it had you liked it, okay. Fair enough, it is fun, it's fun. But it has a big point in it. These have the idea of this, the water, the ocean, this great power that God can control, that the biosphere perhaps can control, like the atmosphere, but we are messing with, and it's coming back to bite us. That's what's happening. And in Aquaman, it's quite interesting because the denizens of the ocean, the mer people and the powerful, actually cause the ocean to give back to us all the terrible things we have put in and hidden in it. The great plastic blob comes splashing out and is now back on land. Nuclear submarines and nuclear waste, all is being given by the water back to us. And by the way, this is happening. This is not, you know, the novels and the picture. Trail of Lightning, I recommend. It's a novel set among the Navajo people in the southwest of America. And it's after what they call in the novel the big water, which is the water level rise, which is threatening our brothers and sisters in Polynesia and New Zealand. It's after that, and this is in the United States, and it takes up a lot of the land real estate, and now they're having to live after this. So the big water. But science has some things to say about this too. So I mentioned the plastic island. I'm not going to dwell on these too much. You know them. And by the way, you know the term preaching to the choir? Does everyone know that term? Well, this is what I'm doing. You are the choir. You are the ones who know, you care. I'm not wagging my finger at you. So, nor do I want to add to climate grief, because it's a real thing. Climate grief is a real thing. It's being measured. Psychologists are treating children with climate grief who are looking deeply into the life that they live today. And people who work with climate chaos are getting very, very depressed. So Linnea and Sheila and I work And of course, Elizabeth is right at the heart of it with the UN COPs, the Conference of Parties. And the negotiators I'm in conversation with them, and they're getting very worn down. They're getting very depressed because they look at this reality all day long. So I am wagging my finger, but I'm not wagging it at you. So what I'm wanting to do is run through a few of the things that are happening in terms of water chaos, which are the outcomes of the Anthropocene, of us being a collective God and not being conscious about what we're doing, and it's coming back as in Aquaman to maybe wake us up. So the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Researchers from the Ocean Cleanup Project claim that the patch covers 1.6 million square kilometers. This is plastic. The plastic concentration is estimated to be up to 100 kilograms per square kilometer in the center, going down to 10 kilograms per square kilometer in the outer parts of the patch. An estimated 80,000 metric tons of plastic inhabit the patch, totaling 1.8 trillion pieces of plastic. That's in the Pacific. There's another one in the Atlantic. Every day, approximately 8 million pieces of plastic pollution find their way into our oceans. There may now be around 5.25 trillion macro and micro plastic pieces floating in the open ocean, weighing up to 269,000 tons. Species loss and endangerment. So this is the species of the freshwaters and the saltwaters. The large pelagic sharks, including threshers, great whites, and hammerheads, have declined more than 75% in the Northwest Atlantic since 1986. Similar reductions over the past 50 years have been reported for other predatory marine fishes. One of these, the Atlantic cod, a species that supported one of the largest and economically most important fisheries throughout the North Atlantic for almost 500 years, has declined by as much as 99.9% in some areas since the early 1960s. So I want to tell you a story from my life. Sheila and I were part of a group that hosted an Anglican environmental and climate change conference in the Dominican Republic in 2010, while the Cancun Conference of Parties UN Climate Summit was going on in Mexico. We wanted to gather Anglicans, Episcopalians, Anglicans, especially in the global south, in Central, South America, and Mexico, and from North America, and we wanted to be away from the kind of really huge busyness of the UN summit that was going on in Mexico. We had a really amazing conference, and a statement came out of it. 10 bishops signed it from different countries, and Yale University was there. And it was a remarkable thing. Everybody went away except the host parties, which was a diocese in Brazil and the Diocese of California. And we repaired to a very mistaken place, an all-inclusive hotel. I had never been to one of these before. I hope to never go again. It's kind of frightening. But one young environmental theologian, Joshua Griffin, and I decided we would go snorkeling because there are coral reefs there, and the water was super beautiful, and we thought this would be great. So we hired a little boat, and actually Sheila and the Bishop of Paraná and his wife and some other people all got on the boat. They were not going to go in. They were going to watch us go in. And we went out, and there was a guide with us, a young Dominican Republic guy, and he hopped off, and we jumped in. We followed him, and we kept swimming and swimming and swimming, and there were no fish. There were no fish. And finally, he saw one, and he pointed to it. And then when we surfaced after that, I was nauseous. There was something hovering over the surface of the water that actually I thought I wasn't going to be able to control myself. So I decided, we left the next day. We were coming back to the United States, back to California. And I said, I need to know what's going on. What was going on there? Where were the fish? What was this noxious smell? Right over the horizon, on the other side of an island, there was an oil refinery. Here, all across the landscape, were these, not just the one all-inclusive hotel, but 5 of them, with in total 11,000 hotel rooms, and all the sewage was going straight into the ocean. Those are 2 factors. The third is that the predator fish, the ones I was just naming about, those are the ones we eat. Predator fish are the ones we eat, by and large, had been fished to extinction. So between those 3 things, there was no life in that water. Now, there's 2 other stories I want to give you, because we as people of faith, I as a person of faith, we put ourselves in solidarity with the vulnerable, right? This is, it's not spreading our money over and our resources and our energy over the earth equally so that we get the most bang for our buck. It's that there are vulnerable people and we need to stand with them. Okay. So, the House of Bishops of the Episcopal Church, my group of wizards that I hang out with, we met in Alaska 2 falls ago. And Sheila and I were actually hosting with Linnea Climate Week, a reception in New York for the UN. So Bishop Curry had me join them later. And they had, the bishops and spouses who were in Alaska had tours of native villages, which were mostly Episcopalian, along the Yukon. The Yukon River is 2,000 miles long. And the salmon, the salmon who come in from the Pacific are these tribes are locked in a relationship, a mutual relationship with the salmon that is perhaps 14,000 years old. Think about that. A few years before, 10 years before, the catch of salmon had been 437,000 salmon. And that year, it was 33,000 salmon. These are their lives. These are the native people's lives. There is no other economy based. The Bishop of Alaska flies his own plane to get to some of these villages because there are no roads in and out. So when the source of food, which is the source of life in those villages, goes down by orders of 10, they can't just get another job, get another source of food. It's not there. So I had that experience. And then I came here to the UK that summer, the next summer, to teach. Who knows who Rupert Sheldrake is? You should figure that out. He's the most interesting person on the planet, almost. He's so interesting. He's an English scientist, educated at Cambridge, and he's doing really different kind of science. He puts things together instead of taking them apart. To understand them, he puts them together instead of dissecting things and breaking them apart. He's a really interesting guy. So Rupert and I were giving a workshop in Wales, Marc. And Sheila and I took a train as far as Carmarthen. And we got out there, and there had been a very friendly, I think that is a redundancy, friendly Welshman on the train. And he was chatting to us about climate change and so on. And he said, you've got 2 hours before your bus is going to take you on to Glendovery, so come with me to the river festival. So we walked down to the river, and there were these remarkable coracles. Does everybody know them? So they've been around in the Celtic world for several thousand years. And this was the main fishing boat, these little round boats, first with reeds and hides and pitch and bitumen on them, and now, of course, there's plastic and so on, but they're still fishing just like this in this river. The main things they fish for are salmon and Arctic trout, or sea trout. They're all gone. And I realized I was with another indigenous group. This man's family, who was introducing us to this, had been fishing on that river in coracles for 500 years. He was able to trace his lineage. These were indigenous fisher people, they were the Welsh. and their livelihood was gone. Where did those fish go? Well, there is this way of industrial fishing where you just suck it all up. And they don't want, actually, even though they're killed and taken, they don't want the trout and the salmon. They're making pet food. And this is not what they're after. But it's destroying this whole set of species there. So what I'm saying in both these narratives is that there's an interlocking health between other species and us. And it is being destroyed in the water. Rising ocean levels. These are our sisters and brothers. And this is what we are here to face together. We know that by 2100, we might have, in worst case scenario, and we keep saying that, worst case scenario, but you're tracking the Paris agreements, right? How we're doing. So you know that the nationally determined commitments were not good enough to begin with, all of ours. Yours, United States, everybody. We didn't make robust enough commitments, and we're not meeting those. So when I keep saying worst case scenario like that's not going to happen, at this stage, that is what's going to happen. This is reality. So that could be 2 meters of water level rise by the end of this century. That is not out of the realm of possibility, and actually we're careening towards it as far as I can see. A scientist with the U.S. Geological Survey said, in terms of our brothers and sisters in the Pacific Islands, when you're walking around the islands and you see kids there, you realize that this isn't something that's next generation or the generation after that. If these scenarios play out, we're talking about those kids' generation. It's current. Finally, I'm hastening through climate refugees. This is probably the most startling thing you'll hear today. A good estimate of the number of climate refugees by 2050 is 200 million. Now I want to put that in perspective. It could be 1 billion. It could be 1 billion. And that is something unthinkable. We don't even know what that means. Now think about the refugee crisis in Europe right now. How many people caused that refugee crisis? How many refugees are we talking about? From Syria, from Sudan, and so on. Give me a number.
400,000.
It's a little more, 1.2 million, all in total. How many are causing Donald Trump heartburn?
3.
Yeah, 400,000 in total. I mean, these are asylum seekers, these are refugees. So take that to 200 million. How will we prepare our communities? What is the inner landscape of our minds and our hearts going to be to face that? We must change our lives. This is about inner transformation. And may I say that your communities of faith, every little parish here in Lincolnshire, is a repository of spiritual health. And you are the people that your brothers and sisters are going to turn to for the spiritual resources to meet all of these things I've been mapping out, because they are coming, and the edge of them is here. So these are the outcomes of the Anthropocene, of us becoming a collective God who is unconscious of what we are creating. And the waters are punishing us in a way that God only metaphorically punished us in the story of the flood. So what about a little hope? The role of faith bodies in addressing the water crisis. People of faith, you heard Sheila say this yesterday, people of faith are the majority of the world's population. 5.3 billion people out of 7 billion people say that they are religious people. That's astounding. Many religions have beliefs and rituals of transformation. We go from discord to peace. We go from disintegration to integration. We go from disharmony to harmony. This is the path of religious transformation. It's in every religion. Religions hold the earth in reverence, almost all. There are countless people of faith already working to protect and heal the environment. Unsung, unknown, unconnected with each other. Ecumenical and interfaith environment and climate action alliances have formed with relative ease around a common mission. We don't talk about dogma, we don't argue about it, we just roll up our sleeves and get to work together. It's really beautiful. Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, said this 20 years ago. It takes a global body to address a global problem. It takes a global body to address a global problem. The Episcopal Church is 16 member nations of the United Nations itself. We are one province of the Anglican Communion, the third largest Christian body on the earth. But let us just, as Marc said yesterday, let's multiply that by all the other religions, up to the 5.3 billion. We are a global body of people of faith who have these common commitments to transformation, to reverence for the earth, and we are a sector that needs to wake up and change the world. NGOs, religious NGOs, numbering over 100,000 worldwide, are working on various elements of the climate environment challenge, including water. Paul Hawken, in a really interesting book called Blessed Unrest, notes that this collection of NGOs is largely not networked. They don't talk to each other. But he hopefully asserts that it functions like the Earth's immune system. What if it were networked? In other words, if it's working as the immune system now, what if we were intelligently working with each other across the Earth? And then, as I used yesterday, the interconnection of life. And I think this is worth, how beautiful is this? Let me read this again. In a real sense, all of life is interrelated. All are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. All religions I know of believe this. This is a great strength because, may I say, compassion is built on the interrelated structure of reality. We cannot be compassionate unless we are connected to each other. We can't objectify and be connected and be compassionate. Sheila, let's just kind of go through those slides of the. So I want to brag on the Episcopal Church and say you're doing a beautiful job, and so are we. We passed 19 environmental resolutions last summer, 2018, at our General Convention to participate in the Paris Climate Agreement fully, to impose environmental racism. These are a few of them. To make disaster resilience policy, the use of carbon offsets, starting with the presiding bishop's office, fossil fuel divestment. We have divested about 400 million of our funds from the Episcopal Church. Bishops standing in solidarity with the Gwich'in people. Ask me about that if you don't know about that. It's a beautiful, beautiful story, very imperiled. Carbon tax, which would be a complete change in the economics of the United States. Gender inclusivity and climate change action. Advocacy for creation care, that's Sheila's carbon tracker. Here's, the last two are about water. Water as a human right. Maud Barker, look her up in Canada, has done remarkable, beautiful work on advancing the idea of a blue pledge that water is a human right. Safe, clean water is a human right for people, not something that should be commodified and sold and regulated. And finally, advocate for ocean health. This one is a big resolution that has many parts because the ocean, as we've seen, has so many parts. It's about ocean health, it's about species, about pollution, but it's also about people in the United States and the rest of the Episcopal Church being ready to welcome climate refugees from the Pacific and from the Caribbean. So I'm very moved by the resolutions that we passed last year. Sheila and I came to you from Edinburgh, where we went to the end of the festival, the Fringe Festival, and the last thing we saw was this very intense dance. 3 Korean dancers. This young man was the choreographer. It was called Goliath in the Water. It got kind of bad reviews because they said, one of them said, powerful dancing held back by murky storytelling. Well, it wasn't murky to me. Every time they went through another clear climate disaster, they were in the tsunami, you could see that. They were in increasing temperatures, you could see that. They were increasing droughts at some points. Every time the 3 dancers went through one of these tragedies, what happened was that one got isolated from the other 2 and was struggling by herself or by himself. And eventually the other 2 see this and they intervene. They lend a hand. They pull her out. She pulls them out. They dance together. They lift each other. This is what we call in theology the horizontal movement. Just stretch your hands out. This is the horizontal movement. Did you touch somebody near you? That's the horizontal movement. That's the horizontal movement. And this is what we must do. We become neighbors with each other. When Jesus asked the question at the end of the Good Samaritan, what is the question? He says, who proved to be neighbor to the man who was injured? Who proved to be neighbor? That's the question that we need to be able to answer at the end of these narrations is, I would like to be neighbor to those in need, to species in need, to people in need. That's the horizontal. But the last thing is that there is a vertical as well. It's not a literal vertical, it's just a way to talk about it. But the Buddha has a very rare mudra. The mudra is a hand gesture of the Buddha. And it's this. I'm going to invite you to stand at your table. And if you're comfortable with it, make this mudra. And it's very simple. You can you just simply take your hands and you hold them like this. And this is called the ocean mudra, because between them is contained all of your inner landscape, everything inside you, your heart. And you embrace it, you hold it. So these are your disappointments, the things you've suffered from others, from yourself, your limitations, that you embrace. They're also your accomplishments, all the beautiful things in each of you, your strengths. This is the ocean as it should be, conscious, where we can see through its limpid depths into the parts that perhaps we have not wanted to see, but only in health can we see them and move forward in an integrated and harmonious earth. Can you feel that? Amen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bishop. I'm not actually going to give a formal response in any
I'm
sense.
so grateful for that. So frightening to have actual scholars.
Well, no, I was going to say so much of it resonates with my presentation, except maybe the call about Aquaman.
Yeah.
Come back to that.
Okay.
And I hope my presentation this afternoon is kind of a response in a sense. So I'm just going to open the floor to questions.
Thank Thank you. I totally agree with you about what the church can do. And I'm sorry I'm going to get tearful now because for 10 years my husband and I have been trying to talk to our church. They will not even listen. There are deniers in the congregations and the vicar has to keep them all happy. We're very loyal and we've stayed and we believe in it. And now I've joined Extinction Rebellion and I've joined a community of love and care and pastoral care. They love the earth and they love people. And I want my church to be angry. I want to join Greta Thunberg and tell the world that this isn't good enough. This is not how it should be.
I'm so with you. Well, it's very heartbreaking. It's very heartbreaking. Our liturgies are not serving us in the way that they need to. I'm speaking of our Anglican liturgies. We've become too far from them. I don't know if you bake bread in your congregation. Do they? That's good. That path is one that could start to reconnect people. You know, if they're using organic wheat, I'm speaking very practically. If a little bread guild could start bringing people in so that the Eucharist isn't this abstract thing that is so far from human understanding, we've got to really touch the reality of the earth. And don't give up on your little parish. I know it's hard, and I see the difficulty the vicar has in trying to embrace it all. But good that you joined Extinction Rebellion. Keep a commitment and find a place that also feeds you. So you were serving us last night, weren't you? That's right. It was so beautiful. Yes. Thank you so much.
I wonder if I could focus that a little bit more closely. Do you have any thoughts and reflections on how you translate those wonderful Episcopalian resolutions into action? Because this is the crucial connection.
Yeah.
How is this to be achieved?
Great question. So I mentioned that my wife is leading the Episcopal Church effort on enrolling every Episcopalian, that's our goal, to measure their own carbon footprint. This is a very practical thing to do. And then it rolls up to your parish, and then that rolls up, aggregates to your diocese, and finally to the Holy Episcopal Church. Well, this is grassroots transformation. If I and my household will look at our actual carbon footprint and then take concrete steps to reduce it, and my congregation joins me in doing that, we join each other. Well, 1.5 million Episcopalians reducing our carbon footprint by 30% would take the carbon out of the atmosphere equal to Coca-Cola's output in 1 year. So that's very practical. We also do advocacy on the Hill. I have traveled numbers of times. They call me a grass top rather than grassroot. But grassroots folks can do this too. In the United States, they have a recess. I'm not talking about your parliamentary recess. But we have a recess in the summer. The House and the Senate go home. But it's a working time. They're back in their districts, and they have these meetings, district meetings. And people increasingly, especially climate activists, are showing up at their congresspeople's offices and saying, we must have climate action. Episcopalians are active on this. We have an Office of Government Relations in Washington, D.C., and they send out a newsletter every week, digitally, that will tell us what legislation is coming up, that we have resolutions in the Episcopal Church saying yes or no, and telling us how we can advocate for it, and people are doing that. So those are two examples. Yeah.
A very evocative talk, Bishop Marc, thank you. As a spiritual person, I was just wondering, how do you reconcile the paradox of the omnipotence of God and the idea that humans have free will to actually solve climate change? Because that is probably a big tension between the spiritual side of climate change and the science policy action side of climate change.
Great. Yeah, it seems to me that that God's omnipotence is not far from you. That's the key. God, so in that inner landscape, Christ is there, in my understanding. This is a very ancient Christian understanding that everything, Maximus the Confessor put it this way, in the human heart are found all the demons, and even the devil himself, but also all the angels, and Christ is enthroned in the center of the human heart. So the omnipotent God is immanent and present within you. And this is, and also God has planted human power in you. I mean, the omnipotent God has made you capacious and given you abilities. And it seems to me that we lessen our belief in God when we make ourselves too small. Does that make sense? Okay.
Comment on a question. Comment picking up on a question.
Okay, I can read the
Sorry,
yeah.
comment on a question. Comment picking up on something from yesterday. Just to be clear, the flood of the Bible
Yes.
was something that God did in whatever sense you want to understand that.
Right.
But the
Or whatever sense you want to understand that.
But the flood that is affecting our brothers in the Pacific already and
Is a real flood.
is a real, and it's being made by humans
It's
in a
unconscious
conscious,
in an unconscious way.
well, it's conscious enough now.
It's more and more conscious.
Yes. The question, I hope you have to give some insight. So the Alliance of Religions and Conservation, the Alliance of Religions and Conservation, which is an organisation that started in 1986,
Yeah.
closed last month. I don't know if you're aware of this.
No.
And I will go on. Do you have any insight as to why and in the light of that, what was missing it?
I'm sorry, I don't. Did you say it was an Anglican group? No.
It was started by the Duke of Edinburgh. It operated
Oh, I see that.
in the
that
UK.
group, yeah.
Yes, Martin Palmer, etc.
Yeah. So I have no insight into that. I will say there's a growing group called the ACEN, Anglican Communion Environmental Network, and it's pretty robust. It doesn't have the Duke of Edinburgh's seal of approval, but it does have great leaders here. I think Rachel Carnegie might be here. Yes? Okay. Who is the head of the Anglican Alliance and works also with ACEN. So I recommend that to you. I think it's growing in its scope and its capacity, and so I'm sorry to hear about that, but I don't have any information about it.
In a previous life, I trained as a civil engineer, and okay, it's over some 30 years ago, so there may be someone has a more updated definition of this, but remember the motto of the Institute of Civil Engineers was something like harnessing the resources of nature for the benefit of humanity.
Yeah.
Has that project failed, or is there still anything that can be done helpfully?
Wow, that's such a great question. It's about relationship, isn't it? What's the nature of the relationship between humanity and the resources of the world? By using a term like that I just used, resources, I have defined. There's a really beautiful book by Carolyn Merchant that I recommend to you called The Death of Nature. And she chronicles the shift from a medieval mindset, and let's leave aside healthcare and other questions of the medieval period, but where there was a sustainable relationship with wetlands, with forests, with fields, and with water. And she chronicles the death of that as being two-sided. One side is, I would call, spiritual. So the symbol system changed, and they started in the language here in England and in France, and started to turn from calling the earth a living being, worthy, and all of life within the earth worthy of reverence, to being a dead body. precious metals and jewels were thought to be born in the womb of the earth at that time. And that's a very ancient idea. And so once her body is dead or vulnerable, living but vulnerable, it's a horrifying thought. We are able to use them as simple resources. So I think I don't know that the project is well-founded. As I said at the very beginning of the talk, the power of pushing against limitations is a good thing in itself. You know, an engineer is a definition of that. You know, harnessing your intellect to be able to make something happen in the world. I think that's quite beautiful. How we do that is really important. How we think about the reverence towards that which we are working on. Is that? Yes. The Death of Nature. Carolyn Merchant. She's the emeritus from the University of California, Berkeley. Yay!
Bishop Marc, thank you for that really powerful presentation. Next time, and I know it's already been touched upon, we have the bishops from around the communion gathering for the conference. What is the message? What is the action that you would love to see from that gathering?
Such a great question. Well, we have some hopes about that. There is a hope that one of the great canoes from Polynesia could come. Is it all right for me to say this? Yeah, could come to London and come up the Thames and bring your life, your message, up to all of us. That's one hope. I think there are questions about how we get it there, and and so on. But as Rachel knows, I'm advocating to keep that dream alive. The other one is our inspiring presiding bishop told me a story about participating in a confirmation service. Is everybody familiar with the idea of confirmation? It's when young women and men stop going to church. So he participated in a big confirmation service in West Africa, where I think, like hundreds of people were being confirmed. And the bishop, who was, I think, the primate, I think it was Ghana, had each confirmand plant a tree as a response to the confirmation. So we in the Episcopal Church have a baptismal covenant where we make promises to guard human dignity, for instance. We're adding a clause that is protecting the dignity of the earth as well. And so if we revise how we make our baptismal promises at confirmation, then we could actually do something visible and plant what I call, so one of the resolutions we didn't put up there is called Planting Paris Groves. Because one of the best things you can do about carbon is sequester it by either protecting forests or planting forests. So what we hope is that every bishop, there's 1,000 registered for Lambeth right now. Think about this. If every bishop went back to her or his diocese and started doing that, encouraging confirmands to plant a tree in an intelligent way, right? If the land is deeply deforested and degraded, you can't just put a climax forest, you can't plant it there, it'll die. So you have to do it wisely. We want to link people to C4, the International Forestry folks, to advise them. But think about it. Millions and millions of trees could be planted by Anglicans around their confirmations all over the world, sequestering significant amounts of carbon. So that's what I'm hoping comes out of the Lambeth Conference.
Okay. Sorry, there were a couple more people who, I think there were a number of more questions, but I do really want to keep to time because I don't want to run into the next presenter's time slot. So thank you, Bishop Marc, and I think that's given us a lot of food for thought and also a lot of kind of food for conversation over the next day or so. So please join with me in thanking Bishop Marc.